and welcome to Fiction Fans, a podcast where we read books and other words too. I'm Lily.
And I'm Sarah, and I'm so thrilled to welcome Gabriela Houston onto the podcast to talk about her novel, The Wind Child, with us.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Fantastic. Well, before we start bombarding you with questions about this book, let's do a little bit of intro. What's something great that happened recently?
Something great that happened recently, actually last week, was quite busy in a very good way. Last weekend I went to YA Lit Fest and Kid Lit Fest in Preston, which is in the north of England, where I actually got to meet my children's publisher, for the first time in person. And like a lot of people I've been emailing with, but people I had never met in person. So that was a really lovely experience. There are a couple of panels. It was just a great atmosphere. On Thursday, there was another event, this time on the adult side. Angry Robot Books, who publish The Second Bell, my adult novel, arranged like author showcase thing in London. And I got to meet some people that I've actually become like quite good friends with over the internet, over WhatsApp, but I had never actually seen in person. It's quite an odd experience, which is especially if they don't look quite the way you imagined them, or you only ever seen their face. But like my good friend, who came to stay over as well, she's so much taller than I imagined her, and she just can't get over it. It's like, because you have this image in your head. It's when people stop wearing masks and you've only ever seen them like the top half of their face, your brain just sort of draws in the rest of it, and then inevitably it doesn't match to their actual face.
Yeah, I've met a couple of people that become friends with from book Twitter and just been astounded by how tall they were. Because when you're on Zoom, everyone looks roughly the same height. And then you meet them in person and you're like, wow, you're towering over me.
Or the furniture is adjusted roughly to the specifications. Mm-hmm. Yeah, everything's in a different scale.
Well, that all sounds lovely. And it's so nice to be able to meet people that you've gotten to know. Sarah, what's something great that happened for you lately?
My good thing for this week is that I have made an appointment with my tattoo artist to expand on the tattoo that I have. So I'm really excited about that.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah.
I'm not going to ask you to describe your tattoo because this is a podcast and that would get boring really fast.
Yeah. I don't think it would be very interesting listening.
I feel like it could be quite like a personal question as well, to be honest.
It can be. I think
I don't feel entitled to ask.
Oh, I do. That's fine.
Right. I think my tattoo, and I've said this to Lily before, I don't think I've said it on the podcast, but my tattoo is just art. Like it doesn't really have any personal meaning to me, aside from the fact that it's pretty. I like it. So
good. As it should be.
Mm-hmm. It's better than the alternative, I imagine.
Yeah.
Yes.
Everyone should like their own tattoos. I think that's important.
Yes.
Yeah. It's a bit of a commitment. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I keep cheating on this question, saying a good thing that hasn't actually happened yet. But later today, I'm going to be planting some lilacs in my backyard, and I'm very excited.
Oh, that sounds very nice.
Yeah, I've left them in pots for maybe too long. Hopefully they make it. But fingers crossed.
Oh, that is nice.
Yeah, I'm very excited. I want flowers year round. That's my goal. Year round flowers.
I used to have a good friend, who's died sadly, but she used to have this allotment, and from the earliest spring until the first frost, every week something else bloomed. It was the tiniest little allotment, but in a kind of style so allotments in England tend to be just like people grow veg. It's not really like a hanging out spot. Mm-hmm. In Poland, the people lucky enough to have allotments in the cities make it as a kind of almost like a little dacha thing where people build like a little hut, and it's just a place to sort of go on the weekends, really. So and they're tiny, those allotments, but people can create some really spectacular things in it.
That's wonderful. That's my goal. She's living the dream. I can't wait. I'm doing pretty good. I got tulips going, so let's start. And what is everyone drinking this evening? I put some cinnamon in my coffee, so I feel very fancy.
I'm just having some red berry tea.
Ooh, that sounds
it's a little bit
good.
exciting. I mean, because you don't require visual proof. I could say anything, right?
Yeah.
This is true.
I feel like I should either like go very shocking with slug juice or whatever, or I should be a little bit fancy. I don't know. But it's just red berry tea.
I'm also drinking tea.
You're not strictly black tea person. What kind? You don't get away with just tea.
I think this time it is orange spice from Numi, because I had a tea bag that I stole from a hotel.
Oh,
Or from a hotel room. I mean, when I was staying at the hotel.
I think it's technically given to you, that tea bag. So.
Yes. I like the way you think.
See, thank you for sharing. Just tea. Sarah, have you been on this podcast before?
Well, I said that because I didn't want to look at the label, because I didn't actually remember what kind of tea I was drinking.
Fair enough. And to sort of ease into our book conversation, other than The Wind Child, which we'll be discussing very shortly, has anyone read anything good lately?
I'm still reading The Phlebotomist by Chris Panettiere, which I'm really enjoying.
It's a good book.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, and if you're into his humor, his next book, The Stringers, is really fun.
We actually recorded an episode with him on Stringers. Stringers was fantastic.
Yeah, he's really good.
How about you, Gabriela? All traveling, no reading?
Well, I've actually just finished a really fantastic novel, actually, by Bridget Collins. It's called The Betrayals. She's the author of a book called The Binding, and I loved The Binding, and I thought, I'm going to buy anything she comes up with. But The Betrayals is like almost on a completely different level, and it's such a lovely experience when you read someone's book and they're a really solid writer, really enjoy their stuff, they're inventive, they're original, and then they just really come into their own prose wise, and I feel like that's what happened here. And so The Betrayals is sort of alternative kind of Europe. It feels like it's a kind of 1910s 1920s almost, but it's in a small country that is entirely controlled by the party, which is just like a very authoritarian political regime that becomes more and more repressive in terms of sort of culture and spirituality and everything. And it follows this disgraced politician who's sort of banished to this monastery school where boys are taught the national game, sort of, I think it's called the jeu or something, or the grand jeu. And it's like this game that's supposed to encompass the entirety of human knowledge, including, and like art and maths and music and architecture and philosophy and history and all of that. And he meets someone from his past. And it's just it has mystery, and it has this kind of feel of, the sort of boarding school feel, but it's claustrophobic, but also with this sort of looming dread of the kind of overarching threat, the party. So it's really, really good.
Yeah, it sounds incredible.
It does sound good. Yeah, I'll have to go look that up. I'm intrigued.
The Betrayals by Bridget Collins.
Excellent. I have only read The Wind Child, but that's okay, because that's what we're talking about.
Well, that's all that matters, really. Yes. I mean,
I agree.
And it definitely qualifies as a good book.
I should hope so. Otherwise, you would have disinvited me.
No, it was really fun. I haven't read a book written for a younger audience in a really long time, and I just forgot how, not comforting. There are definitely some scary moments in that book, but the whole just sort of experience feels warmer. Maybe it's just my nostalgia hitting me. I don't know. Nostalgia for a book I hadn't read before. Is that weird?
No, if that's the dream, really. From my point of view, to hear that, I'm very, very happy to hear that. I think people sort of can sometimes expect one thing, because obviously it tackles some very serious issues. Mm-hmm. But a childhood experience, even one that is as dark as that, has potential for so much else in there. Everything is an adventure, everything is new. So
is there any difference in the way that you plan a book or write when you write for a younger audience versus your adult novels?
Not plan. I'm not much of a planner anyway. When I write, to be honest, I kind of, I have a sort of initial idea and I sort of follow it through and I follow the characters and sort of see where it takes me. I mean, so The Wind Child is, just to give it like a quick introduction really to it, it's basically, so it's a Slavic folklore inspired novel about Mara, who is a granddaughter of the god of winter winds. And she sets out on this epic journey to bring her beloved father back from the dead. She travels with her best friend, Tornev, who can change into a bear. The initial sort of difference when you approach a book is that Mara's age is different. So her life experience is different. I don't think that children's books should like dumb down things, you know? Mm-hmm. They like, mm-hmm. if you really feel your characters who are younger, then you kind of start thinking in a kind of how would this character see the world, how do they experience all those different things, how do they interact with people, you know, because some of those interactions, they are not prepared for them the way an adult would be. So in that sense, it doesn't make that much of a difference to the kind of writing process. There are certain things, obviously, which you have to be very careful when you're tackling children's book. In terms of, you know, like gore or anything like that, you know, you have to kind of be very careful. And I mean, I don't believe in completely cutting out like whole realms of human experience from children's books. I think a lot of books have been doing that, especially sort of on the children, you know, like younger children's side. And I don't think it necessarily serves children very well. As much as you'd want to, you can't shield your children from experiencing the world. And the best you can do is prepare them. And I think books which have like, you know, it's like have been scientifically proven to actually build empathy and to sort of help children develop empathy. And you can't just pretend that all this stuff like loss and fear and abandonment and loneliness don't exist. And I don't necessarily like even reading children's books where like everyone's always very happy, you know, like where there's only perfectly happy families and, you know, all of the mothers always like smile benevolently and all the fathers are just fun and like, you know, because it doesn't match up with a lot of kids' experiences. And I think a lot of children experience childhood loneliness, for example, and Mara, the main character in The Wind Child, is a very lonely child. She's a very isolated child. She grows up in a palace of her grandfather, the god of winter winds. And even though she's half god, she doesn't fit in with the world of the gods. Mm-hmm. She looks human. She has no powers. And, you know, she forms a very strong attachment to her father, who sort of understands her experience better and who can relate to her, unlike her mother, who finds it very difficult to relate to Mara. And I think like when you write a book with a child who's lonely, and I think a lot of children can respond to that because she finds a way, you know, she has to learn to relate to others and she has to learn how to form friendships and sort of most importantly, how to rely on other people. And, you know, that's a theme that I'm very interested in because I think it's a process much more than it's something that we are born with. Mm-hmm. You know, like we are a species that really adjusts very well, and we're a species which is born with a certain level of like learning how to adapt to other people's kind of expectations. But learning to rely on other people requires, I think, a lot of different mental processes, and it's something that even adults often struggle with. So that's something that I was quite interested in.
Yeah, you mentioned grief earlier and just the horrible loss that Mara is struggling with throughout the book was absolutely heartbreaking and very touching. And I won't say any more because this is not the spoilery section, but we do have some questions about that coming up later. But it's not a spoiler to say that there is quite a bit of Slavic folklore in this novel.
Yes.
We were wondering, I mean, it's probably an easy question, but where did your inspiration come from for that?
Yeah, the ideas shop. Mm-hmm. You know, so I'm Polish, mm-hmm. So I'm a Slav. So Slavic folklore is something that I grew up with as a very small child. And it's something that seems to only really exist in Poland. It was very like childhood sphere. And I think now there's a bit of a renaissance where people are starting to get more and more interested in it. But I kind of, left it in early childhood and then moved on to reading other mythologies, like I was very interested in Norse mythology. I was very interested in Greek mythology and Celtic mythology. So I only sort of went back to Slavic folklore as an adult, really. And I'm actually, in a way, grateful for this sort of experience of moving away from it and coming back, because I come back to it with a very different perspective and more sort of comparative knowledge about the different mythologies. And that is something that I find really interesting in Slavic folklore. So in terms of the research and the sort of sources of inspiration, a lot of it is very loosely based in Slavic, so there's a creature that inspires me, but the whole sort of ecosystem of that creature is something that I add on. The thing that I try to stay true to is the kind of feel of a mythology, and especially as in terms of sort of the facts and the names and all of that is very fluid, because there were no, unlike like Norse counterparts and Celtic counterparts and sort of obviously like Greek and Roman mythologies and Egyptian even, there's not an awful lot that we know for certain about Slavic mythology and Slavic like ancient religion, because all of it was erased when sort of the Christianity came quite late to Poland in sort of about a year like 1000. And the priority wasn't to kind of keep a record of anything. The priority was to sort of Christianize it as quickly as possible, and it was a very brutal process. It was not voluntary, really. And so
is it ever?
I mean, sometimes it's more kind of gradual,
Oh, fair. Okay.
But I think it was a political priority to Christianize those lands in order to really protect them from the aspirations of very aggressive neighbors who would otherwise have an excuse to invade. So the process went quite quickly to sort of try and erase any traces of sort of mythologies. And those stories that were very deeply rooted in a kind of everyday world of the sort of Slavic people, those stories were very like changed and quite dramatically. So goddesses and good spirits became demons and devils. It's interesting when you compare the stories that seem to have this, the Slavic folkloric stories that have this very strong Christian element. So you can see that they've been heavily adapted. And those stories that seem to have been preserved in a more or less, well, you can't say intact, that, that doesn't have that very hard ideological angle. So you feel like, okay, well, that's sort of closer to the original than others. So, even comparing those two different roots of a folklore in Poland, it's a very interesting process, because like folklore and mythologies really show us the values of a society that they were developed in. And, what was important for people living in that society, what kind of qualities were desirable in a person, how did they relate to the world outside of the community, as well as the role of every individual within a community. And those are dramatically different, whether you look at Norse mythology, whether you look at Egyptian mythology, whether you look at, at Slavic one. So I try to kind of identify the elements that really feel like intrinsically Slavic to me. Mm-hmm. And I sort of expand on those. So rather than necessarily staying very close to a particular story of a particular character, I try to shape them around that sort of feel. Mm-hmm. Like authentic feel. And it's something that is very difficult to sort of describe, because you're either successful in conveying that feeling or not. It's, you either see it or you don't, so that is something that was quite important to me.
How do you balance doing that, like taking that authentic feel of the character and describing these creatures and gods that your readers have likely very different levels of familiarity with?
Or like none.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think it's very, the only difference between what I do and what people do when they describe, I don't know, like do a retelling of Homer or whatever, is that there is like a set text of Homer. There's a set text of, like Celtic myths. Like, you can't take the figure of Apollo necessarily and make him the god of, I don't know, builders or whatever.
Something completely unrelated.
Although he was actually quite like inspiring for architects, isn't it? So it's a bad example. But anyway, you can't make him the god of harvest, because people who have even the like most passing familiarity with Greek myths, they know that that's not him. So I have way more leeway in what I do and how I subvert certain things. But on the other hand, like, I don't feel like the reader needs to go into my book with like having read X, Y, and Z, because that's not the point of a book. The point of a book is to entertain. And so I am not trying to educate people about Slavic folklore. This is not an academic text. Those creatures are there to give that feel, to give you like, it's lovely if people like leave, like finish reading my book and they feel like, oh, you know what, I really want to explore a bit more and like buy some like bestiary or some other text because they feel like inspired by it. But, that is not the primary focus of a book. So the book is led by main characters, and this is the world that they inhabit. And I describe it in a way that you would describe the world of any like fantasy novel, really.
The Wind Child, after finishing reading it, it really did make me want to go out and read more Slavic folklore and learn more about that. So even if that wasn't your primary goal, I think you succeeded very well at that as well.
Thank you. I'm very happy to hear it.
I have not read the second bell yet, but I understand that there's a lot of Slavic folklore woven into that one as well. Yeah.
Yes. So the second bell obviously is Slavic folklore inspired. It's less folklore heavy. So it's very much focused on the community, and there's like one folkloric element that is like at the center of the book, but I kind of subvert it. So like I took a very different approach with that one. So my next adult book, which I can't name yet officially, that is sort of going to come out next year, is more folklore heavy in a way of the Wind Child. But the second bell is like, it basically subverts a trope.
So do you have a favorite creature or god from folklore?
You know what? I do actually. I mean, and I'll be perfectly honest here. Sometimes if I write a character from Slavic folklore, it's like in my head, I can no longer tell which bits I made up and which bits are the ones that I actually researched. So it's kind of hard. But yes, a couple characters, Uncle Borova and Auntie Borova, who are the forest guardians. And the thing that I really love about them, which is something that is so intrinsic to a lot of Slavic folklore, in my view, is that those creatures are not good or bad in terms of our understanding of them. They are perfectly ambivalent towards human race. And I think we often tend to look at creatures like sort of folkloric creatures, mythological creatures, and judge them in the context of how they feel about us. Whereas Uncle Borova and Auntie Borova, they're not interested in us. I mean, if we're interlopers, if we come and mess about in their forest, if we try to hurt one of the creatures under their protection, then they're going to come down like a fix on it. But that is not their primary goal or motivation. So I really love that about them. They're sort of this complete ambivalence towards humankind and this fierceness with which they love and protect their forest. And I think in Slavic folklore, I see there's especially the kind of a pre-Christian elements, there's a lot of respect for the natural world. And there's a lot of sense of, so quite interestingly, actually, I find that in Slavic folklore, kindness and a sense of sort of respect and like mutuality of respect and empathy are valued. They're actual qualities that are desirable in a hero. And so you have in a lot of stories, a character walks into the forest and, there's like a little bird that begs him not to eat him or whatever. And the true hero will feel pity, will help, even the smallest creature, the most like a viper, like you will help the creature even if it feels a bit dangerous. So I love that there's this sense that we are not necessarily the only rulers of a world, that we exist in a world that doesn't exist just for us, that we have to coexist with everything that lives around us.
I think we had some really sort of similarly complex notes on Zavenna, the main character's mother.
Understandable.
Oh, yeah. But I love the way that the book approaches her character as not, I mean, she's a very distant mother, but not a bad one, just far away emotionally. And there's a couple of really excellent lines in the book where Mara's father says that it's not that Zavenna didn't live up to her promises. She never promised that she would be something other than who she is. And I think she has a similar line.
Yeah, she also has a comment about just being herself and never claiming otherwise. But I think that, and before you got on the call, when Lily and I were making our notes for this interview, we were talking about Zavenna and how she's this kind of distant mother, and how, like, if it had been the father figure who was distant in this way, we wouldn't have blinked an eye, like that's very, that's not unusual. And so I think there's a conversation to be had about like this cultural expectation that the mother is either going to be, this warm, caring character, or the antagonist, like the villain, which is not, obviously that's not the case with Zavenna at all. So yeah, it was interesting.
I think in conversations about like different types of motherhood are conversations that have only started happening really recently. And there's this sort of conversation sort of in terms of sort of psychology that I find really interesting about love language. And it's a term I never heard growing up, but it's something that people kind of recognize as like that individuals and like the people in different communities, they have different love language. They have different way of showing emotion, of showing love. It's interesting. I watched on like, it was ages ago on sort of social media, there was a conversation between a few Southeast Asian people who were talking about how their parents show them affection. And there were several people who had a common experience of their father, like perhaps not necessarily talking to them in a very emotional way, but if they mentioned that, oh, I had like this really nice orange, I really enjoyed this orange, they will show up with a crate of oranges the next day. So there's like a different ways in which we're taught to show emotion, depending on where we're from, what are the cultural norms are of where we live, and also like our individual kind of nature. And, some people are very huggy. Some people show love through trying to control every aspect of your life. And some people show love through food or just being there, very practical sense, perhaps, and that's something that I'm quite interested in terms of, so Mara has this very dual nature. She feels closer to her father, who is very affectionate, who is very kind of present emotionally for her, and who interacts with her on a kind of much more intimate level. And she feels like, so this is what I need, this is who I am. So she really anchors her sense of identity to her father. But, her mother is a part of her too, which she sort of, tries to push away for a bit. So her mother is a goddess, right? A very minor goddess, but she's an immortal. And I imagine, someone who would live as an immortal, surrounded by immortals, even like humanesque, they would develop a very different attitude to life, even attitude to language, because they have all the time in the world. They don't need like the directness that is perhaps desirable in someone who's, whose lifespan is not as long. And Zavenna, she is herself, and she has this child that she can't relate to, because this child seems to have needs that Zavenna doesn't actually understand. And it's not that she doesn't try. It's just that she doesn't know even what she's supposed to try for.
I mean, it is very clear that she cares about her daughter. She just doesn't know like how to express that and how to interact with her in the way that Mara needs her to.
When we get near the end of that section of the book, there's sort of the moment where you realize that she has been basically sacrificing herself in order to stay with Mara. And I thought that was very touching.
Well, she didn't have much of a choice either. She wasn't necessarily allowed to go back. But yeah, I mean, but the cost, right? Mm-hmm. It's about the sort of also like there's always this invisible cost in what we get from people, and we don't see what it takes for them to give it. Sometimes, if we have a friend perhaps who's always there to listen and always supportive, and we kind of grow to really rely on that, and it becomes very easy to forget that like somebody else taking on all of that emotional burden for our sake, for the love that they have for us, that it's not cost free.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people often forget that.
Well, I ended up really loving Zavenna for the moments she was in the book.
You will meet her again, don't worry.
Oh, good.
Oh, good.
Sarah, why should you read this book?
You should read this book if you enjoy Slavic folklore, if you like to see characters develop and learn more about themselves and learn how to rely on other people. And it doesn't matter if you're a child or if you're an adult. I think you could read this book at any age and enjoy it. I certainly have enjoyed it. So yeah, that's why you should read this book.
To avoid spoilers, skip to 47:38.
You mentioned earlier that you don't really plan out your books per se. Were there any scenes that surprised you when you were writing The Wind Child?
Often, yeah. I mean, you have a character enter a scene or enter a problem with a limited number of resources at their disposal, and you have to find a solution even as they do. So that's a bit that I find really exciting about writing in this sort of discovery mode, because you really kind of inhabit this character and you feel frustrated when they feel frustrated, and you're trying to sort of find a way forward. And so when there was a scene where we're looking for Buyan, so this is for people who've already read the book, right?
Yes,
so
yes.
So I don't have to
no holds barred. Yeah.
So when they're trying to find the island of Buyan, and Mara is basically on top of Tornev, who is paddling through the sea, and they're trying to solve the riddle, right? It's like, because it's a place between is and isn't. And, she kind of has to I spent a while like thinking about it. And I just kind of like, I don't know if I might have made up this, I found the name of like the island of Buyan somewhere in like one of my encyclopedias of Slavic mythology, but I might have taken that phrase somewhere between is and isn't in some way. I might have paraphrased it. I don't know if I made it up or I stole it from somewhere. I have no idea. But I was thinking, like, I have committed to this vague description of it, and how can I kind of build on that? How can I find the solution for them? So we're in the water, and I'm like, okay, limited time frame. They can't paddle forever. And then you have those moments of clarity when you're like, well, it's also about her identity. It's about who she is. And this is her family after all, right? So Buyan is island created by her uncle, the god of summer winds. So she has those two natures in her, and she has access to those two sort of sides of her family through her blood. And, when in doubt, the blood is always a solution, basically. In fantasy novels, at least.
Yeah. Oh, Tornev, though. I do need to talk about Tornev.
Of course.
Because he is Mara's best friend, only friend that we see, at least in the book.
But he deserves the title of best friend as well.
Yes.
Okay, I agree. Because he's such a, he does so much for her. And I am kind of torn. He kind of goes through a lot to help Mara, but he also does get this cool adventure out of it. And I can't really decide if he's a tragic character or if he got as much out of the adventure as he put into it. I don't know. I can't.
I think they really need each other. So they're both very lonely children, and they both have a dual identity, albeit his is without a sort of magical element to it. So he grows up with a very loving father, but he's an outcast because of his absent mother. who is of, Bottrish origin. And the society of that person, of that country, like rejects that sort of ethnic minority that his mother is from. And so he grows up not only not having access to his mother's culture and only receiving everything like bad that comes with, having that heritage. And so when he sees Mara, who has that kind of added element as well, he feels for the first time this kind of commonality that allows for building of a bond. And the fact that she responds to his sort of, friendship overtures and that she sort of stands up for him and also has that deeper understanding of where he's coming from, even if she doesn't quite know how to be a friend to begin with. So that is something that he maybe didn't even know how much he needed it when he met Mara. And he has a need for this like kind of being special and that bear skin that he gets. And it's like, on the one hand, it's meant to be this like, this sacrifice, it hurts when he transforms himself into a bear, but he relies on it like to kind of have this sense of like, oh, this makes me special. And of course, Tornef is a very special boy in by any definition, but he doesn't necessarily feel that. And I think we, very often try and build our sense of self around like a particular element of our identity. And in general, like, I think, sense of like identity is such a fluid concept. And I think people like to think that it's something that's quite fixed and like sort of individual to us. But in reality, people's identities shift over time and, depending on who they're around, where they live. And I think for Tornef, that sense of self shifts as well. And Mara, definitely, because of course she sort of learns that she is not just human, as much as she wanted maybe to be at a certain point. She doesn't even fit within her very loving human family. She understands on a very basic level that she doesn't really fit in there. And she thinks that maybe if she accomplishes this task, maybe if she brings her father back, then she will fit in. Mm-hmm. She'll come back the conquering hero as well with her beloved father. And all of that will somehow make all the other stuff go away, the stuff that's complicated about her. Yeah, so I think they kind of learn to sort of find their sense of self and who they are in each other, and they kind of build on that, because you always like sort of build your sense of self on your relationships with other people, how they relate to you. And we so often like build our sense of self based on other people, how other people see us, so it's like an external thing. So yeah, I think all of those elements mean that, like, Tornef was like an essential part of this journey.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
My heart hurts for him so much. And I don't know, it feels like he goes through hell for Mara's kind of harebrained scheme. I don't know. I hope he feels like it was worth it, and I can't tell if it is, but
maybe you will by next book.
Oh, there we go.
Maybe you will by.
Oh, so there were two things in this book that Sarah and I were like really expecting to go one way, and then it ended up going a very different direction. One of them we had planned to talk about, and the other one I thought of during this.
So that's always very interesting to hear.
So the first thing that we both expected to happen was we both thought that Mara would make it in time to at least speak with her father, if not like outright save him. And that obviously does not happen at all. Like, she is just completely too late. Well, basically completely too late. And she doesn't get to have like a final conversation with him or anything. And that just really subverted our expectations.
Yeah, but she gets to see more than people see anyway, which is that there's a sort of a rest and another beginning. There's like a natural circle to things in him.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it felt like an ending that needed to happen. Like, it was a lesson that she needed to learn. And so it was very satisfying. It just was not what I was expecting to happen at all.
I get that. And I think, I think it would be, because I know, I'm writing about grief for children, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that has to be handled with care. And I think it would be emotionally dishonest for me to offer any other ending to this, because there are so many children who go through grief. They lose their grandparents, sometimes they're less, unfortunately parents too, they lose all kinds of people who are close to them, and they don't get to say goodbye, the one last time. They don't get the option of bringing them back. And Mara is avoiding her grief by choosing action. She goes on this adventure because she feels like, I can undo this. And I think it's a very important lesson in life that there are sometimes sad things that happen that we can't stop. And in a very, twist away, that is okay, because that is just the way life is. There's all aspects of life that we need to kind of accept. These things happen, and you can either choose to sort of move on from it or to sort of dwell on it, but that never helps. So I don't think it could have had a different ending and remained honest, and respectful of the process that she was going through.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you. Just like I said, I was surprised.
I think on the level, like, we all hope for like a happy ending sometimes, but then we're like, well, it couldn't have been. But
my other one is much less thoughtful than that. But I was really surprised we never actually saw. Oh, I shouldn't have brought this up because now I have to try to pronounce Koschei?
Koschei the Deathless.
Koschei, yes, the Deathless. He sort of is mentioned quite a bit in the novel.
Yeah. No, so basically, like, it's part of a duology, right? For one child. It has not been announced yet officially, so I can't say, but yeah, that sets up the sort of final arc of it. So don't worry, you'll get your chance.
Yeah. I have to say, when Mara is falling and something with wings catches her, I was like, there he is, because I think he's described as having wings.
Yeah, I thought that was going to be Koschei too.
Yeah, it was not.
Not that close to the end of a book. Come on.
I mean, when you're reading an ebook, you don't always know how close to the end you are.
That's true. It could have had another 500 pages for all I knew.
I would have happily read another 500 pages.
Aww. I mean, it would have made for a very atypical middle grade novel, but
yes. Yeah, that was my I had that light bulb moment and I was just completely wrong about it. But no, I don't remember her name, but the character who does catch her and ends up sort of actually helping Mara deal with her emotional journey, it was very sweet. And then her triumphant reunion with Torniv, who is the best.
Yes. I mean, those two belong together, really. I think this idea of having those like very close friendships, it's something that is not, interestingly enough, like I thought that it was like normal for kids, like and adults, to have this like best friend sort of figure in their lives, but it's less common than I used to think. But it's such an important aspect of sort of life in general, like friendships. And I think people often undervalue them in terms of they think that like, oh, friendships are almost something that you do in your 20s, and then like you have a family and you kind of meet people, once a year or something. And I think it's like it's been proven like scientifically that people who have very close friends who they see regularly are much happier and more satisfied with life than people who do not, who only sort of stick to their nuclear family.
So you're saying it's scientifically proven that Dungeons and Dragons is good for you?
I mean, by extension, yeah. I imagine so, yes.
That's because that's the only time I see people.
I mean, I don't have the facts and figures at my fingertips. I can make this very uneducated guess, and we'll stick to it. Yeah.
So I did have one more question that you've kind of already answered. And I'm not sure, because you said that the second book isn't officially announced yet. So I'm not sure if I can officially ask this on the podcast.
Yeah, I'm not sure either.
Okay.
I mean, okay, you know what? Nobody's going to like crucify me for it. That's fine. Let's go. I mean, I won't give too much, like I won't give any spoilers, obviously.
But and like I said, you basically have already answered this, but reading the book, I was thinking, oh, this ending really leaves open the possibility for a sequel with Mara and Tornif talking about like going to find her human soul and defeating Koshé. So did you have any plans to write that? Obviously, the answer is yes. You are?
I wrote it one after the other.
Did you?
It's a duology. So it feels very complete. So you have the sort of individual arcs per each book, but there's a bigger overarching arc that needs to be kind of answered and tied up. And that's where the sort of the second book comes in. And I wrote them together to my agent's frustration. He was like, well, I can't stop you. But there's always a worry, obviously, if you write more than one volume and the publisher doesn't sell enough for the first one to pick up the second one or something. But luckily, in this case, people seem to like it. So the second one's going to come as well. And then you'll have your complete story.
That makes me very happy because I do want to read more about Mara and Tornif's adventures.
And I want to meet Koshé.
Do you though?
I do, because I'm safe on the other side.
It doesn't sound like a kind of person you would actually want to meet.
No. But through a book, I want to meet everybody.
Yes. And you also mentioned that we get to see more Zavenna.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And I'm excited for that too.
Yes, I think I'll be very interested to hear in what you think about Zavenna's journey and sort of what we see of her, the other sides we see of her. I liked what you said. Like I thought you had quite like a nuanced view of Zavenna, and I like that because that is what I intended in terms of this sense that she is not a bad mother. She is just who she is. She's a distant mother, but she's not intentionally. She doesn't seek to harm her. She's not cruel. This is just how she is by nature. And I think there's more of that. And I think in the second volume, I think you'll see more of like how Mara comes to understand her mother a bit more, because I think there is definitely still this barrier in the first book of Mara maybe not having that more complex view of her mother. Like she understands how her mother thinks, but she doesn't understand how her mother relates to her necessarily. So she still sees herself as very separate from her mother.
Well, I can't wait.
Yes, I'm excited.
I'm so excited too. It's just I can't wait for it to come out, so I can actually chat to people about it. It's always such a lovely part of the process, once the book is out, and then people have questions, and then you can discuss the process at length. It's such a pleasure.
Well, hopefully we can talk to you about it soon.
We've talked a little bit about the second duology that you're working on, or the second book in this duology that you're working on, but you also mentioned that you were working on another adult novel.
Yes.
I don't know how much you can tell us about that, if anything, but if there's anything you can tell us about it.
My publisher gave me an okay to talk about it during the Thursday event. So, I don't know if it translates into talking about it on like a podcast that's available anywhere. But yes, there will be an adult book coming out late next year from Ring the Robot as well. Not to sort of give away too many details, but it is also like very heavily relies on sort of themes of motherhood, but like in a slightly different way, in a kind of like, what would you do to keep your child?
Is it a standalone novel?
Yeah, it's a standalone. Yes, it's completely a standalone novel, and the second book is an adult novel and has sort of it's like a mother and daughter team really. But the Bone Roots, the main two characters are in the kind of mid to late 40s, and it's very much their journey.
Oh, I'm excited for that too.
A bit darker. It's a bit, yeah. I like that thing.
Okay, now I think is the time for you to plug your social media presence.
Oh, my social media. Oh my God, my social media. I
tell people where they can buy your book. And
for announcements, I do my announcements on Twitter. I don't really interact with the world on Twitter anymore, apart from like if people actually send me a message or like tag me. Yeah, but I do announcements on Twitter. So it's at Gabriela Houston. So if you're interested in anything I have coming out or any events I'm doing, I put it all on there. I also have an Instagram account that feels like a happier space to me. So I'm on there more. It's at Gabriela Houston 1. And I also have a website, which I forget to mention. But yeah, it's GabrielaHouston.com. I really make it easy to find me.
Yeah. I was going to say, I'll remember that one.
Yes. It's on the Instagram, but it's like Gabriela Houston 1.
Well, thank you so much for talking to us about the Wind Child today. It was a blast.
It was a pleasure. My pleasure. Yeah, it's you ladies had like some great questions, and it was really lovely chatting with you about it. I'm glad you enjoyed it as well.
Absolutely.
That's key, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I'm really looking forward to reading The Second Bell. I've owned it for ages. I just haven't had the time to read it yet, but it's going to happen.
Hopefully now it'll like jump to the top of the pile. Yeah.
It kind of, yes. It's jumping to the top of my TBR for sure.
I'm being presumptuous, but I'm glad to hear that it worked.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Fiction Fans.
Come disagree with us. We are on Twitter and Instagram at FictionFansPod. You can also email us at fictionfanspod@gmail.com.
If you enjoyed the episode, please rate and review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and follow us wherever your podcasts live.
Thanks again for listening, and may your villains always be defeated. Bye.
Bye.